let's jump into biotech and what we're seeing in these markets. It's been an interesting couple of weeks here. It feels like we're in the first part of a rotation. Small caps are in favor, tech rebalancing. What are you observing from this, and how is it impacting biotech?
Yeah, Jonathan, I think the best way to characterize, as you said, it's an early part of the rotation. So I think folks that have been following biotech for, the past several years know that we're in the longest and deepest pullback in the history of the sector. The S&P Select Biotech Index is down 65% peak to trough, and we're in the 14th, 15th quarter of this move. So it's been a tough place to be. But I think that with changing rate expectations and perhaps a more clear line of sight to when we might actually get rate cuts, Bill Dudley just came out this morning. The headline of his piece was, "I've changed my mind. We need a rate cut at this upcoming meeting." I think we're going to hear more of a chorus for cuts, and whether we get one in September or the meeting or two after, I think that the line of sight, Jonathan, starts to become very clear, and we think that's going to be a continued tailwind for sectors like biotech that have been sensitive to cost of capital, have been really inversely correlated to 10-year yield, and really have been left for dead to some respect.
Well, even amidst that, the big drawdown we've seen, it does seem like momentum's been the leading indicator in the space, that people are chasing momentum stocks. Are we seeing a breakdown of that, or a pause, or is this the end to be a break? What's your conjecture on that?
Yeah, always hard to call, the end of the move, but certainly momentum as a factor, has moderated substantially in recent weeks. And, just this morning, you see, Tesla put out, somewhat disappointing earnings numbers and forward guidance, pushing out things. So, to see a stock like that down 10% and the read across from some of the other tech momentum winners are starting to roll over. Our view is that at some point folks are going to overstay their welcome. Is today the day, or is it, the next leg up? It's always hard to say, but I think that we're clearly seeing an unwinding or an early unwinding of that move. And, we'll see how it plays out. But, I think it's a great time for allocators to consider those other sectors that are over in the corner that no one's really been talking about, that might have some headwinds that are turning into tailwinds, perhaps.
Well, one of those tailwinds is kind of interesting because there were an election season. There's lots of things going on in regulatory world, but so far it seems like either way, Republican, Democrat, House, Senate, President, it does seem that it's pretty constructive regulatory environment. And whether that's Sarepta Therapeutics or uniQure, you've seen some good things from a regulatory environment perspective. What are your comments about that?
Yeah, certainly from an FDA perspective, I think that's right. I think, FDA as the gatekeeper regulator for innovative medicines to access the US market and in a lot of other markets that queue off FDA approvals, have been relatively constructive. So, just to touch on a couple examples, right? You mentioned Sarepta, Jonathan. So, they're just got approval of the leading gene therapy candidate to treat Duchenne muscular dystrophy. This is an orphan kind of muscle wasting disease that is pretty terrible for these young boys that are afflicted. And I think FDA looked at the totality of the data, even though some of the efficacy data was admittedly mixed for the filing package that the company submitted for approval, but FDA approved it, which maybe they wouldn't have done if they were perhaps being more restrictive, or if it was a different type of indication without such severe unmet need, given the mixed efficacy data. But FDA approved it, and I think that's a clear vote of confidence for innovative medicines that
Mm.
if you look at the data in totality, the risk benefit appears positive. There really isn't a major safety concern, and the efficacy is suggestive, that perhaps falling, just a bit short of completely definitive. So that's I'd say a great positive for the sector as a whole with a, constructive, gatekeeper regulator.
Hmm. Are there any others that have been interesting? I saw that uniQure was in the news. I've heard you talk about that one. They have a drug for Huntington's disease, and that seemed to have a good response to some testing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that one, Jonathan, is actually related to Sarepta. So I think folks looked at the Sarepta approval and said to themselves, uniQure is working on a gene therapy for Huntington's disease. They're a little earlier in their clinical development, but they announced some updated longer term data that showed, again, I would characterize it as suggestive signals of efficacy. Again, not smoking gun definitive, but pretty
Hmm.
suggestive. The stock rallied over 100% on that news. Again, because I think folks have some expectation that regulators might be a little more accommodating for these type of indications where there's severe unmet need. There really aren't a lot of great therapeutic options for Huntington's disease patients, just as there are not for Duchenne muscular dystrophy patients. And by analogy, maybe there's an expedited path to market for a drug like this, where, in an alternative regulatory environment where, the bar might be set, you know, more rigorously higher, you might not expect to access the market as easily, and there might be more scrutiny. So I think that, it's, these things tend to read across to other companies in the space, and I think uniQure is one example of that.
Well, it does seem interesting that the market is kind of strange. The fundamentals for a lot of these enterprises are pretty good. Do you get a sense that flows into the space, whether it's in the hedge fund private world or in more public world? Are they consistent? Are they going up and down? And where are they at as it relates or relative to a typical investing period in the space sector?
Yeah, I think that, from what we can tell through prime brokerage trading desks we trade with and other kind of private fund contacts, is that flows have been somewhat limited. There isn't a lot of generalist participation across mid cap biotech as a whole. I think that there's a few, the momentum theme, is seen in biotech. So companies like Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk are trading at record multiples, higher valuations at Nvidia, if you can believe it, on a 3-year forward multiple basis. With half the margins, less than half the growth rate, but they still trade at higher multiples. Interesting
Mm.
times for these kind of FOMO momentum plays. And you see a little bit of that in some of the big biotechs, like a Vertex, for example. Some of these things have really just gone up and to the right seemingly every day. Large cap medtech has the same phenomenon. There's a couple of companies
Mm.
like Intuitive Surgical, a few others. Great businesses that are performing well, but they're pushing out the extremes of where multiples can go. So you see capital flowing there. What you're not really seeing is capital flowing into, some of these companies that we're talking about, and I would say
Mm.
a big fraction of this mid cap universe. And we think that's again an opportunity. As headwinds turn to tailwinds with interest rates, with the election getting in the rearview mirror. I think it's a fool's errand for us to try to predict precisely the outcome of this election. Certainly, the events of the past few weeks have if they taught us anything, it's that to expect the unexpected. But I think that when we have it in the rearview mirror, the most likely outcome is that there's not going to be a broad mandate with a single party controlling all branches that's going to be able to push an aggressive healthcare agenda one way or another. And so,
Mm.
assuming that's the outcome, having the election in the rearview mirror probably takes away that headwind for the sector.
Sure. Well, we're still in the summer, right? It's not even August yet, so I'd expect lows to be muted, and especially as we wait for rate moves. I know there everybody's pricing in September. Dudley, you said might be sooner. It feels like there's going to be a lot of just let's wait and see, and that's okay. They're not great, not bad. It's just kind of an okay market, and that's kind of the sense I get from things right now.
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity. So we're looking at is an opportunity to position for the back half of the year. We're actively making some moves. We have earnings season, kind of we're in the midst of it now. A couple
Hmm.
large caps have reported, but the bulk of mid cap is going to be ahead of us in the next couple of weeks. So we're looking for opportunities to reallocate for stories that might have major clinical regulatory events between now and the
Hmm.
end of the year. perhaps some companies we've been interested in that have come into more attractive valuation bands, doing some rotation. So it's a great time for us to, position the portfolio for what we think are going to be more constructive markets for biotech in the medium to longer term.
Mm.
Again, Jonathan, we've been in this pullback and consolidation phase. We're starting to see early signs of a macro rotation. We haven't really seen broad-based generalist participation. And we think that, a lot of these headwinds, as they start to turn to tailwinds, or at least, cease to become headwinds, I think set up well for what we think would be an interesting medium to long-term opportunity.
Well, sounds like exciting times, and we've got earnings season, like I said, halfway through, and looking forward to the second. Excuse me, looking forward to the second half of the year. It's going to be a ride. Hopefully, it's not too wild. But with that, we'll go ahead and end here. Thanks so much for the time, Mark. It was great chatting with you as always, and look forward to a good rest of the summer.
Will do. Always a pleasure. Thank you, Jonathan.
All right. Thanks. Take care, everybody, and we'll look forward to speaking with you next week for the next Doctor is in call.